Welcome to Tramlines, a podcast from Agrii. I'm your host, Tony Smith, putting your questions to the experts. In this episode, I'm talking about liquid fertilizers with Agrii's Paul Gill and oilseed rape starter fertilizer with Tom Perrott. Now, with fertilizer being a key input for crops, we take a look at how liquid fertilizers and starter fertilizers can help growers improve their gross margins and, of course, help the environment at the same time. Well, that's quite a big question in terms of what we're asking today. So let's start off by asking these experts. So Paul, I'm going to start with you. I know you've just come back off your holiday, so welcome back first thing on a Monday morning. Good morning to you.
Morning, Tony.
Good morning. So the first question is liquid fertilizers. I'm assuming that in the season now, we're at the start of June, what would be the next application that farmers could be thinking about?
Well, they're probably looking at potential milling wheat applications for products that will help boost the protein at harvest. But it does happen to be a small part of our general liquid fertilizer campaign. The overall liquid fertilizer business that we do is more on spring applications onto general crops.
Right. And Tom, from your point of view, do you get involved in liquid fertilizers as well?
Yeah. And being a little bit sort of further south, we probably have a little bit less milling wheat. It's amazing the variation you get over the Wiltshire and sort of Hampshire, Dorset areas. Very much the same as Paul, really. You know, we do a bit of Protol and foliar end products. But now, the focus is on to spring with the new campaign.
Right. Okay. So when we come on to the next step then, in terms of liquid fertilizers, what would that be? What crop timing would that be then, Paul?
Well, in terms of timing, we're looking at next spring probably. And the campaign that Tom was talking about is looking forward very much now for, believe it or not, 9 months in terms of the liquid fertilizer purchases that our customers will be doing.
Right. And when we spoke before, you were actually talking about the storage requirements on farms. So I presume from a grower's perspective, it's not just thinking about, well, are they going to be using which particular liquid fertilizer products, but also thinking about their infrastructure to be able to use these products, aren't they?
Absolutely. And, the basis behind liquid fertilizer is where it starts is storage, as you just mentioned, Tony. And the tankage that's required on farm these days can be supplied by Agrii if required, and they tend to be in either 30, 40 or 50,000 litre GRP upright tanks, which can obviously be useful in as much as not just for storing fertilizer, but also for freeing up other storage on the farm, which may well have had solid in, which now can be used for machinery that was kept outside or other purposes. Maybe even earn some money.
And Tom, how involved in liquid fertilizers do you get?
Well, because I'm sort of predominantly arable in my area, quite a large percentage of my guys are liquid. And it's a system that just tends to fit very well with, arable farming, I would say. You know, some people are always concerned that they can't use a trail sprayer, or they've got to have a state-of-the-art, super-duper self-propelled things cost, a fair few bob. But actually, we've got a number of long-term standing customers that are quite happy using a trailed machine. And so that means that it's accessible to most.
Okay, so we were just talking about milling wheat just now. So Tom, what crops are you using liquid fertilizers on where you are?
Well, it gets used throughout the rotation. So, I mean, it could be on anything from feed wheat, oilseed rape, winter barley. It's just wherever you'd use solid, you can use liquid instead, just with the benefits that you get from liquid.
Right. And Paul, you're nodding away there. This is really something you're an expert in. And when we were talking about the precision of application with a liquid fertilizer, that environmental benefit of placement of the fertilizer. Tell me a bit more about what are the environmental benefits of using a liquid fertilizer on your crops?
Well, I think the accuracy of applying solid has got better over the years, but it's still, we see strips at field boundaries of unfertilized crops, which at the end of the day is yield loss. And a few years ago, we did a study on a fairly large estate in Berkshire, which looked at the potential. We measured all the potential for all the yield loss for all the fields, and it is potentially very significant. This estate of about 2,750 acres was the potential for 450 to 500 tons lost crop on those field boundaries where the fertilizer had not been applied, which in terms of income is significant.
That really is. So it's not just the environmental side. There's that real financial benefit to the farmer of not losing that that performance on the margins, as you said. And Tom, what you were saying about the equipment that growers can use is that it's much more accessible in terms of the equipment that growers can use to get these products on. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a bit of maybe a bit of an aged stigma around using liquid fertilizer, that you need to have sort of state-of-the-art twin-lined machinery. But modern spray nozzles mean that you can use a standard sprayer and just have one particular nozzle set up, and that will give you accessibility to be able to apply the product correctly. Yes, there are advantages to having dribble bar setups on twin line machines and things like that, but it's not actually necessary to use the product to its maximum benefit. Yeah,
and you guys, to me, sound very, very aware of actually the use of these fertilizers, of these products on farm. The application that you're talking about there, Tom, the detail you're talking about, the nozzles there. So in terms of how you guys work in your role, my understanding is that you support the agronomists who are then obviously walking the crops. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we tend to be the go-to for liquid fertilizer for the agronomists. When they want to talk about liquid fertilizer, they will ask us, because I think they see the experience that we've had over the years dealing and setting up liquid fertilizer on farms as being the way forward, because they know that they'll get a service which hopefully is second to none, and the farmers will then progress through the system and be happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you sound like the second to none experts to me, Paul. That's for sure. So let's talk now a little bit about moving on from liquid to starter fertilizers. And Tom, I'm going to come to you about that. Just clarify, what crops are starter fertilizers aimed at? Is it all of the arable crops or just certain ones?
I think as time moves on, there will be a portfolio of products that are going to be available for pretty much all arable crops. It originally started off looking at trying to get oilseed rape out the ground and up and away from the word go. And that's evolved now to where we've got starter fertilizers aimed at autumn cereals, at pulses, at spring barley, because we've started to see, a degree of success in getting this nutrition in from sort of the plant's foundation, if you will. So, I think it'll be open. Won't be very long before we have most bases covered, I'd suggest.
Right, and for these crops, when we come to starter fertilizer products, are they very much pre-produced products, or can they be quite bespoke according to the farm and the crops involved?
So it's an interesting question, Tony, because there's a whole range of off-the-shelf products which we've trialled, both on a replicated sort of system and also on a tramline system with farmers. And they've proven to be very successful. And the agronomist can recommend if the rate needs to be slightly different, or how that product could be tailor-made for that farmer's situation. Having said that, if a farmer has done a degree of soil sampling, has got a degree of history of using alternative nutrition, and the agronomist is aware of that, and they've had a discussion, then we can tailor-make a grade to suit that farm and that crop's requirements.
All right. So when you talk about that tailor-made product, what sort of area can you work with? What's the minimum area that a farmer can consider having a tailor-made product? Paul, give us an answer here. Let's put you on the spot. Here.
Well, they put me on the spot. I'll have to get my calculator out, but I was think probably 20 acres worth is probably the minimum on a starter fertilizer ability. It all comes down to the level of the minimum level of fertilizer that we can get our supplier to produce of any specialized grade.
And the other thing as well is that some of these products need to be pre-applied with P reserve, or like the enhanced urea needs to be treated before it can go out. So there obviously needs to be a minimum amount of that to go into the system. But the rule of thumb is the best thing any customer can do is to talk to their agronomist or talk to us, find out what their situation is, and we can have a discussion about tailor making a grade that fits their, sort of agronomical sort of requirements of that crop.
Yeah, absolutely. I get that. So advice is the key, isn't it? But it's also, I can hear, very accessible for smaller areas of crops being grown. But let's just think about that principle of the starter fertilizer. So, Paul, from the point of view, let's focus on oilseed rape here. What is going to be the key to getting that crop away?
Well, the key is really, and it's been shown many times now by the use of these starter fertilizers we've got, is to keep the dreaded flea beetle at bay by having a strong and healthy crop.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking to your colleagues in seeds, they were very much talking about picking a variety that's got strong early vigour. But also, Tom, coming back to you, when we spoke before today's recording, you were talking about drilling the oilseed rape when there's sufficient moisture, and also that benefit that the crop can get from the fertiliser that's around that seed. Tell me a bit more about that in terms of supporting what Paul was saying, which is getting that crop away.
Yeah, I think the first thing that we need to highlight is that I think farmers get a little bit disheartened that the advice isn't out there in terms of there's not one blueprint to combat this pest and get crop established successfully year in, year out. We have to tailor make each establishment, each crop based around an individual's particular situation. So it might be that if a farmer can leave long stubble, use the cover crop, use starter fertilizer and everything else, then everything might go swimmingly. But in terms of moisture, I think some people just think that we can just get on, drill the crop, it fits in with the farm's timetable. And sometimes a bit of patience for a little bit of weather can really help make the difference to how that crop can establish. And there's two reasons for that. Obviously, the plant can germinate and has access to moisture to get it out of the blocks. But also, if you're using a starter fertilizer, whether or not you've broadcast that ahead of the crop or you've placed it with a seed using a Gill hopper drill, that little bit of moisture will just help to break down the nutrition that you've put into the soil and help the seedling gain access to it. And again, that'll have like a multiplied effect of getting that seedling out and established as quickly as possible.
Thanks for that, Tom. That's really great advice. You also mentioned earlier on when we spoke about the rising cost of DAP. I'm really interested, how can growers mitigate that cost? How can they manage that high input cost? Paul, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, Tom's right. And the DAP prices, like a lot of phosphates, have been, because of international pressure on them, have been going sky high. And I think the key is in usage really of our starter fertilizers, whereby we don't need to apply as much DAP as we would do if it was DAP in order to get the positive response. And so you can actually bring the cost down per hectare purely by the amount of fertilizer that we need to apply to get that crop off to a good start. Would you agree, Tom?
Yeah, I think if you want to put some numbers to it, on oilseed rape, for example, for an average kind of application of DAP around about 167 kilos a hectare, you'd be applying probably 140 kilos of our Agrii Star oilseed rape product. And the reason for that is the fact that the phosphate is treated and therefore it doesn't get locked up. It's not affected by, or it's less affected by the soil's pH and other outside factors which can have an influence on that phosphate availability. But by putting on less product in a more targeted approach, you are set to save around about £12 a hectare on input costs. And that doesn't matter whether or not you've placed it or broadcast it. And I think that's the other thing to bear in mind, that there are a lot of farmers that are concerned about starter fertilizers and hear the phraseology, if you like, of starter fertilizers and think it can only be applied down the spout of a Gill hopper machine, where in actual fact you can apply it, broadcast it ahead of the drill, and that'll help incorporate it into the seedbed where it needs to be.
Yeah, so there's two benefits there financially, aren't there, to the grower? You've got both your, as you said, your saving of your £12 per hectare or in that region, but also you've got the phosphate being more available to the crop. And as you said, Paul, we've got to get that crop away if we stand a chance of getting past the cabbage stem flea beetles. So there's lots of benefits there from using that product, aren't there? Or if nothing else, actually getting the right advice as to which product to use. Anything that you would like to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to quickly add, Tony, if it's all right. I think, phosphates are becoming more and more under the limelight environmentally. So actually, we are now looking sort of at growing these crops with a very much the mindset that less is more and needs to be more. We need to be applying less to look after the environment, but as an agricultural business, we don't want to be, having an impact on yield. So using products like this, in the correct weather conditions and correct environment, all these sorts of things, all has an impact on that and can only be positive in my mind.
Yeah, well, that makes perfect sense to me as well. To wrap up this conversation, Paul, I'm going to ask you first, with regards to liquid fertilizers, what would be your top line message to growers concerning what they should be thinking about right now?
Well, we hadn't really talked a great deal about the environment issue with liquids, did we, earlier? And I think, just to follow on from Tom's point about phosphates, the nitrogen application that going forward, that it's going to have to be not just financially, but also massively towards the environmentally safe. And if we can apply liquid fertilizer exactly to the end of the spray boom, going down to where it's needed, no shorter, no further, then the environmental benefit speaks for itself. And I think that's one of the top points that we need to talk about going forward to both our growers and to our agronomists.
And Tom, coming to you with regards to thinking particularly about oilseed rape and seed fertilizer, what would be your top tip, your call to action for growers and agronomists to be thinking about right now?
Well, it's an interesting one, because I think the call to the growers is they're almost already doing it. We've got so many growers that are, starting to understand more about crop nutrition from the word go, rather than sort of traditionally planting it and waiting to see what happens. The world is starting to agronomize nutrition, which is what we need. So I think actually, it wouldn't be so much about the starter fertilizer as it would be about talk to your Agrii contact, talk to either me or Paul or whoever your fertilizer contact might be, and fully understand what is available to your business and how that might be of use. Because I think there's an age-old mindset where, agricultural businesses will often buy a lot of fertilizer early doors. And I always sort of akin it to grain trading. If you have a good price on grain, you don't sell all your grain. Well, you've now got access to alternative nutrition for your crops. So you can actually manage the risk of expenditure on fertilizer by targeting nutrition, which gives you the benefit of risk management financially on farm, and also helps improve the crop's establishment and its potential to actually yield successfully for you.
Paul, you were going to add something.
Just one last thing, and I think it needs to be said that whenever we have a liquid fertilizer conversion, and when that grower has finished his first season of using liquid fertilizer on his farm, I've heard it said quite a few times, why haven't you told me about this before?
Well, you can't say better than that, can you, Paul? And that's a great note to finish on. So thank you, Paul and Tom, for not only an interesting insight into liquid fertiliser choice and getting oilseed rape off to a great start, but also hearing about some real financial gains balanced with environmental considerations for arable crop husbandry. That's it for this podcast, but do tune in again as we meet the experts throughout the season, exploring the many immediate and longer-term questions for growers and farmers in the UK. If you have any questions, of course, that you'd like us to ask the experts, email info@agrii.co.uk. See you next time.